partners and trust between those trading partners, and not to infect these other regions of the world or other regions of the country with the pests that we have in our particular area. We want to make sure that we are able to disinfest the fruit after the harvest. Great. So you'll have to stand back here and hear this. Michigan, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in the United States. Within 1 year or 2 years, we see that it's spread all the way to the Upper Peninsula. This distance here is about 300 or 400 kilometers, okay? So quite a distance. And then within about a 10-year period, we see it all the way up here, the East Coast, as well as in the Midwest of the United States. So what does this mean in terms of the ash tree that we're talking about here? Well, this is what a summer forest should not look like. This is normally a green canopy, a complete green canopy in the United States. What you see there is about 50% of the population of that forest is deceased due to the green emerald ash borer. Okay. So this is kind of a nice way to visualize what the impact can be of the insect pest that's delivered via the fruit, let's say, or in this case via wood products from one place to another. So our particular interests in this particular case is 2 insect pests. I'll be talking mostly about the blueberry maggot, I believe it's Mendax, but a little bit also about this problem pest here, the spotted wing Drosophila. So I don't know if people know about the spotted wing Drosophila, but it is really quite a problem. And the reason it's a problem is because our traditional pests, like the blueberry maggot, which does not exist, by the way, in the western part of the United States or in some of our market areas, has one cycle per year, okay? But the spotted wing Drosophila has a cycle every week to 2 weeks, okay? So where before we could just control the pest with a single spray, now we have to spray throughout the season every 5 days in order to control that pest, okay? It's a huge problem. It's not the kind of problem we want to donate to another area of the world, although it was gifted to us in the United States. So one of the methods that we have to control it is the use of sprays, pesticide sprays, as was mentioned. But we also use some techniques. These are kind of organic control techniques using exclusion netting. And as you can imagine, it's very difficult to grow a crop under an net. Makes sense. So we're kind of focused then, because we can't get complete control on some of these insects with post-harvest control measures. Methyl bromide is a traditional method that's been used. It's a biocide, it's a volatile biocide, and it's also, unfortunately, an ozone-depleting agent. So it is a pretty toxic material against insects, termites, rodents, weeds, nematodes. You could put in humans. It is also quite toxic to us. It's a nervous system disruptor. And in the last few years, EPA has agreed via the Clean Air Act to reduce the amount that's used each year. So we're going to see the use and the availability of this particular chemical to be declining over years. So we have to have a replacement. So what we looked at in this particular case, our failed experiment this last couple of years, is using sulfur dioxide as a contaminant, as a fumigant, pardon me. Sulfur dioxide has some beneficial properties. It does control post-harvest rots and table grapes. It is approved for food use, okay, so it makes good sense. The concentrations that are used is somewhere between 100 and 1,000 parts per million. We're thinking about it as a replacement for methyl bromide, and it's not ozone depleting. So if it was active and useful in terms of replacing methyl bromide, it would not. It has some very good positive attributes. However, it has the potential to cause injury to plant tissues. Its injury potential for blueberries is unknown, and it is an irritant and potentially toxic to humans at very high levels. So some of the experimental questions that we propose to answer through the research that we did over the last couple of years is look at whether or not low pressure fumigation can increase the damage to the fruit or reduce damage to the fruit. So by low pressure fumigation, that means fumigating at very low pressures, pressures of about 1% of an atmosphere. Okay, so hyperbaric pressures. The other was to look at determine whether or not there's certain varieties that are more resistant to sulfur dioxide toxicity than others. And then also, as I kind of intimated, that we would look at sulfur dioxide as a fumigant for reducing blueberry activity. So the first experiment, look at these low pressure fumigation methods. In this case, just to give some details of the experiment, just to focus, we looked at 1 hour or 2 hour exposure. If you're going to disinfest fruit, to disinfest insects from fruit, you can't have an overnight exposure. It has to be quick. You have to move fruit into a facility, gas them, disinfest them, and then move them out of that facility. So we focused on a very practical time frame, which is what's used for methyl bromide, 1 to 2 hours. We used low pressure, as I mentioned earlier, and then which is 20 millimeters of mercury or normal pressure, atmospheric pressure, and then 6 levels of sulfur dioxide concentration. And we had a number of characteristics that we looked at. This is the system for the low pressure system. We actually use the same chambers for normal pressure as well. So these containers here, which are 2 feet wide, 2 feet tall, and they're able to withstand the pressures of 1% of an atmosphere. And then the equipment that we use is over here, this vacuum pump in here, a cold finger to reduce moisture accumulation and movement into the vacuum pump, and some monitoring equipment there. This is a kind of a graphic showing what we did for the different concentrations that were used here, and then these would be the chambers, vacuum manifold, and then we would have different blueberry replications inside. Okay. So in terms of some of the quality characteristics, weight loss, soluble solid contents, titratable acids, acidity, neither the low pressure, the high pressure, the different concentrations that we used had any effect, okay, which is nice. It's nice to know you can apply a treatment and not have a negative effect. However, we did see losses in firmness or texture that were unacceptable. So in this particular case, when we got to a concentration, this is a log scale, so that'd be 10 parts per million. This would be 100 parts per million, 1,000 parts per million, and 10,000 parts per million. We began to see after about 1,000 parts per million a loss in firmness. I won't go through the details, but the low pressure seemed to be a little bit more aggressive. We also looked at the color of the fruit, and this is probably the most important aspect, looking at the color of the fruit, because that's what people use to make their purchasing determinations. And in terms of the lightness of the fruit, I think I should have back a little bit here. We looked at 3 different characteristics. The lightness is one of those characteristics. At higher L value means you go from a low lightness to a high lightness. We looked at changes in red coloration, and increase in red coloration is an increase in this A value. So the fruit would go from blue to red, if that would take place, and then blue value, less blue, would be positive here. So anyway, this is some of the problems that we were looking towards here, and this is the reddening of the berries caused by very high concentrations of the sulfur dioxide. In terms of lightness, almost no perceptible change in the lightness that we saw. However, we did see an increase in the redness of the berries, and as was mentioned, so if you look at these numbers down here, somewhere around 1,000 parts per million of the applied material we begin to see a shift in color change, with a slight enhancement in the activity if the pressure was a little bit lower or for a longer period of time. So longer period of time, lower pressure seem to have a positive effect. And then the same thing is true in B. An increase in B would be a loss in blue coloration. Remember, it's a blueberry. We want to maintain a blue coloration for the fruit. And so we had above about 1,000 parts per million. For some of the treatments, we saw a loss in blue coloration. So I'm not sure this is a true color representation, but we tried to do it with a Pantene type of system here, looking at the different times, 1 hour, 2 hour exposure, low pressure, normal pressure. You can see under normal pressure as well as low pressure with the highest concentration that was used, you see the red coloration. So this is the kind of color that we expected or we found on the fruit. So it's the same strategy here, looking at lightness and greenness, yellowness, blueness. But in this particular case, there's a way to actually represent all of that data in one shot. And that is using this thing called the delta E, or the Indung, German term for the change in sensation. So it's the difference between one color and another color in a three-dimensional color space. And then this is what the data would look like. So if you look at the complete change in color from one exposure to another, taking into account lightness, changes in red, and blue coloration, and so on, this is what we would find. So once again, over about 1,000 parts per million, you see this color shift. So this becomes our limit for our application, somewhere about this range between 500 and 1,000 parts per million. Okay, so our second hypothesis was that we could use different varieties to maybe reduce the color change that we were seeing. So we looked at several different varieties: Jersey, Elliott, Draper, Blue Crop, and one called Liberty as well, and then different levels of the sulfur dioxide concentration, color, visual quality that was just mentioned, and then some other things that I won't report on, glassity, and so on, which we showed earlier tonight. Once again, we use the same system for exposing the fruit to these different concentrations of sulfur dioxide at different pressures. And this is what the data looked like for Blue Crop. So Blue Crop is one of our most popular blueberry varieties that we use. If you take a look at the varieties here, 0 parts per million, 1,000, 100, 500, 1,000, 5,000, and so on. You can see that maybe you begin to see a slight shift in the color here at 1,000 parts per million, but certainly by the time you get to 5,000 or 10,000, the color shift is really noticeable. That would be completely unacceptable for that variety. So this is Blue Crop, one particular variety. This is a display showing the different varieties that we looked at in this particular study. So we have 4 different varieties in this graphic. Blue Crop, Draper, Elliott, Jersey, all of them having just about the same kind of response. So unfortunately, it doesn't look like we have any particular variety that has a shift in sensitivity. But this is one of our evaluations, and you can see the color for them. If you were looking at the color in Pantines, you can see once again, once you get to about this level, you can see discoloration in all of these varieties. In terms of visual damage, what we perceive with the eye, which is sometimes different from what you can see with a piece of equipment using a color measurement, is we developed a scale. This is what the scale looked like from 0, which would be a normal blueberry, all the way up to 9, which is our lightest and most reddened blueberry fruit. And this is what the data would look like when we separated the fruit out here. So what we did was we took the fruit and we gave them to students to evaluate relative to this. Scale, and they didn't know what the treatment was, so all they had in front of them was the color of fruit that they judged the color on. But what you can see here in this particular case is a little different story. That even though the color meters gave us one bit of information, you can see that in terms of what a person sees, maybe there's a slight difference in the susceptibility of the blueberry varieties to this sulfur dioxide treatment. And that perhaps there might be some other varieties, maybe not these tested here, that might give us even more protection from the sulfur dioxide. Okay, the third part of the experiment, looking at sulfur dioxide as a fumigant. So here we find out if we can apply these concentrations that don't cause color change, but still give us some protection from the blueberry maggot. So here's a little fellow laying eggs in the blueberry fruit. So we looked at infected blueberries. One of the things that you would see is that the blueberries become soft and shriveled. And we know that the blueberry maggot is established in Michigan, but as I mentioned, it's not everywhere in the United States. And so if we are going to ship blueberries from Michigan to the western part of the United States, we have to make sure that they're free of this particular pest. So currently we cannot do that because of this pest. And then they're not present in overseas methods in this case, we looked at several different treatments, and this is kind of important up here. Storage duration of 0, 7, 14, 21 days at 0.5 degrees Celsius. Blueberry fruit are not chilling sensitive like a lot of tropical and subtropical crops. So we can store them at very low temperatures. We use the low pressure once again, and normal pressure, and then the 6 levels of sulfur dioxide as we've shown before, with a couple of different exposure times also that we've shown before. And then after a bit of time, we measured the blueberry maggot emergence, and this was done through my colleague, Rufus Isaacs, who I'll introduce to you in a moment. And then this is the technique that we use using 100 grams of fruit, pre-rubbing history treatment, and so on. And then the treatment temperature was 10 degrees Celsius, which is a useful technique. So Phil Fanning was the technician to do a lot of this particular work. And these are the chambers that we use. So these would be the berries that we knew had blueberry maggot in them. Okay, and then we expose them to the sulfur dioxide in those chambers that we showed you a bit earlier. The blueberry maggots, they would grow and thrive in the blueberry fruits or not, depending on what we did with them. And then the maggots would drop down into the soil down below, and then finally they would pupate and emerge. So we would measure emergence of those blueberry maggots. And then in what you can see here are 2 different treatments. This is 60-minute treatment with 2% sulfur dioxide. And this is 0.01% sulfur dioxide. And what you can see is that the berries here are more intact than these berries here. And the reason that these berries are not intact is because the blueberry maggot is consuming the berry from the inside. Okay? So they're being reduced to almost nothing. So it's very high concentration for a long period of time, but sufficient to stop the blueberry maggot, at least based on the visual appearance at this point in time. So what happened, the question then is what happened in terms of emergence. So when we did this analysis and we took the fruit immediately after treatment and moved them to room temperature and then did this evaluation with the blueberry maggot and emergence, what we saw was no effect of the treatments, just a lot of noise. Okay? So what this probably tells us is that sulfur dioxide may have made it into the tissues, but it escaped from the tissues at higher temperatures pretty rapidly. Okay? Into the tissues but back out. But when we looked at this same data after 7 days storage, we see a bit of a different story here. So what would happen at the low sulfur dioxide concentration, no effect of the sulfur dioxide. But when we see 1,000, 10,000 parts per million at the 7 day storage, we begin to see the effect of the higher concentrations. And we were reasoning that what's happening here is these higher concentrations, the low temperatures that were used in this storage treatment were sufficient to keep the sulfur dioxide in the tissues. Sulfur dioxide partitions into water, dissolves in water at a higher concentration when the temperature is lower. Okay? Otherwise, it escapes the atmosphere. So by maintaining the low temperature, we maintain the sulfur dioxide within the berry fruit and got a better result in that case. Once again, higher concentration. This is after 14-day storage. Well, the other thing that you're going to be seeing here is the number of blueberry maggot emergence, the amount of blueberry maggot emergence decline. 7 days, 14 days, and then 21-day storage. By 21-day storage, what you're seeing here is that there's very low blueberry maggot emergence. So really, the thing that's probably most effective is not our bloody sulfur dioxide, but rather low temperatures. Okay? So that's the take-home point, I guess, in our field experiment, is that sulfur dioxide, yeah, it can have some benefits. We can get some blueberry maggot reduction. But in the end, probably our best story here is that simply holding these fruit at low temperatures for an extended period of time can not eliminate, but reduce the pest. So we're thinking that what we need to consider is some sort of fertile technology where we use low temperature in combination with probably not sulfur dioxide, but other irritants that might be more useful. In terms of efficacy, if we were to break it down, this is just a little bit of detail here. You can see that in the intermediate time frames, we got some benefit due to low pressure. So, low pressure. So we had higher reduction. I guess that's what it would be. But by the time we got up here to 21 days, because almost all of the blueberry maggots were finished by the low temperature, we didn't see the differences. And then in terms of separating out, looking at it from another angle, I guess I would say, in terms of looking at concentrations, low pressure was always just a little bit more effective than the normal pressure storage. So once again, the low pressure, based on what we had anticipated, because we were reducing diffusion or enhancing diffusion of the fumigant into the fruit, we got a little bit better control. in sulfur dioxide causes bleaching. The blueberry fruit at concentrations greater than 1,000 parts per million. Increasing the concentration and treatment duration decreases fruit quality, so we cannot use this very high concentrations for a 2-hour exposure period. And then low pressure treatment really doesn't appear to give us a lot of it, to reduce fruit appearance over normal atmospheric pressure, but it does appear to increase blueberry maggot mortality. So low pressure storage, a little bit of a benefit, but not great. Overall kinds of interpretations here, long-term storage at low temperature probably was reasonably effective at controlling blueberry maggot, but not to the level that would be sufficient for us to maintain the markets that we were talking about. In that particular case, you have to reduce the blueberry maggot numbers 10,000-fold over the initial inoculation amount. So unfortunately, as I said, it's a failed experiment. Prepared you for that initially. Little advantage using sulfur dioxide unless you like red fruit. I think that's it. The people that are responsible for this particular project, Rod Cook is our industry representative, root-sizing to the PI and the grant. Patrick Abel is the person that did the laboratory work, and Bill Fanning, I mentioned to you earlier. So, you have to take questions.
Thank you, Michael.